presenters today are Ray Lambert, my oldest brother, and Evangeline Larocque. I knew her as Evangeline Tremblay.
That's right.
Our purpose is to talk a little bit about the history in this immediate area, particularly the Steinauer House, the old hotel, and areas around it, the post office and the monument and so on. Every community has its history. Every person has its story. And so we're here to kind of review that story with you with a couple of presentations from Ray and Evangeline. And then from you. You have memories, I'm sure, of the area here. And so once we have a couple of presentations, I'm going to hold them to 10 minutes. And then we'll open it up to some discussion. If you have something to say, maybe they presented a provocative statement that's going to get your memory going. So with that, Ray Lambert, my dear brother and historian and genealogist par excellence. So.
Thank you, Hank. Thank you. I just wanted to tell you that I'm going to try to focus on the Steinauer house, but if I go off the track, I've got two sisters here who are going to bring me back in line like Mom did. Okay. So Ruth and Rita, the two R's, and I'm the third R, but the first one. And the Steinauer family, apparently with some others, were from Germany, and they were Hessians, and they fought on the other side of the revolution. They were living in the New York Poughkeepsie area and decided to move north into Canada, where the British colony of Quebec was, in Canada, and therefore they'd be safe. So in 1787 they came up and they landed up near the Rock River, and they figured they were safe. The boundary line hadn't been drawn yet, but unfortunately for them it was drawn north of them, so they became U.S. citizens automatically in the sense of living in the United States, newly founded. So in Johann Pieter Steinauer came with his son George Sr., and George had 5 children with his wife. In 1788, Henry Steinauer, founder of the Steinauer House and Hotel, was born. He was one of the first born in Highgate. Steinauer legacy is that George and his wife had 16 children. That was quite a legacy. They beat our parents by 3. I was able to find 14 names online. And Henry Steinauer became a tanner. Now, the Vermont Historical Gazetteer says that he had the tannery in Highgate. However, the Swanton history site says that his tannery was in Swanton. 1833, he quit, came here. There was no Highgate Center. Everybody was in Highgate Falls or up near the border with a settlement that was there that was decreasing because of the falls, and in East Highgate. Henry was the instrumental founder of Highgate Center. There were no houses here. And in 1868, a year after he died, the Vermont Gazetteer mentions that there were 46 houses in Highgate Center. In 1950, as a little kid, I counted the houses in Highgate Center. There were 50. Mm-hmm. So it kind of remained a stable community. So he as I say, had 16 children, and his father, George Sr., had 16 children, and one of them was named George Jr. He bought what became the Steinauer farm on what's now called the St. Armand Road, and just as it takes a sharp left, there was the Steinauer farm. It was purchased years later by my maternal grandparents, Henri and Maria Laroche, the Steinauer farm. Okay, so with that, I think I've gone long enough.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
That was 3.5 minutes.
I don't think so.
I knew there'd be somebody to keep me track.
Gosh, you're good. This job is easy. So, Evangeline, you have memories of the Steinauer house. You live just across the street, and
I did.
Take
So
it.
I go to a later period of time in the early 1940s. It was owned then by Court Laux.
Oh, yeah.
It was a beautiful private home with lovely manicured flower gardens. And as a child, in fact, in those days, I walked across the street from my home, which is at the brick house, by Trombley's store to get drinking water from Mr. Lautz's well. He had a spring with a hand pump at the side of the house, and so that was big doings for me. I have photos of my mom, dad, and of myself taken beside the driveway along the side of the house. My only regret is not having written down my dad's memories, Amity Trombley, his memories of the inn when the residents were overnight passengers who arrived by horse-drawn coaches to await their departures the following day. They were provided with a good night's rest and meals. Of course, there was a livery stable on this property and a wheelwright shop to attend to the needs of the horses and carriages. Mr. Laux also owned a house which might tie in with our neighboring street, the Gore Street / road, which is where Sam Austin lived. But at one time, Mr. Laux owned the house, and it was a rental. Mr. and Mrs. DeMars rented that home. Other memories of this site are a gas station / garage owned by Cleo and Wiley Raymond, Rudolph Messier's barber shop, the snack bar run by Mrs. Campana, and in later years, R&J's run by Peggy Perry and her son John, and also the Steinauer Cafe, which was run by Rosalie Macy. And in this very building, a garage owned and run by Ephraim, better known as Fagey Macy, in this building and where we sit today. The Mesha property was conveyed to Ephraim and Rosalie by deed of Ethan Azeltine in March of 1965. And those are some of my memories at a later time of this property.
the Steinauer house, of course, is owned now by the town of Highgate, and the taxpayers have purchased it, and Heidi is back there, and the committees that are around have been trying to get input. What's the best use of the property? What can we do with it to form a core center, a more vital core center? And so with that, I'd like to open it up if you have any questions or comments, memories of the Steinauer house.
I don't have any questions, but years ago when I was a young child, my grandmother, Libby Lambert Austin, and I used to walk from way up on Route 78, of course it was all dirt road then, down to Trombley's store, and we would walk by the Laux house. And she seemed to like to talk about the Laux house. Of course, he had a little filling station where he'd be sitting outside on a little chair or stool or something. And after we went into the Trombley store and she purchased whatever she wanted to take back home, she'd take me in there, and I'd come out with an ice cream cone.
Of course.
To eat on the way home, because it was always hot. It was summertime and it was hot. So that tided me over till we got home.
Nice. Nice experience.
That's what I always heard the place. There was Court Laux and there was Del Laux. And I think Del Laux had a farm up on the Gore.
Yes.
And Court Loves had this big house
Yep.
here, where we are. About the Loves house because I was always so fascinated by it. And my grandmother said, well, you know, this used to be a hotel years ago, and I couldn't, that meant nothing to me.
Of course.
But to her, that was very important. And the horses, carriages used to draw people in and take them away. But just to see the house, when we used to come down to go to Charlie's store, it was a big occasion for me because I got to look at the Loves house.
Of course.
And I don't know why, but I was fascinated with it, and I still am.
It was a beautiful property. It was, as a child, I was fond of the property myself.
Well, I somehow had the idea that we would be going into the Lux house today, but apparently not, because I see there's a gate on the side here. I'm curious about the interior.
Yeah.
Many are.
Yeah. Well, Mrs. Bior, I just wanted to let you know, when you mentioned the Lambert name, that means we're connected. I've done the genealogy. I know we're related somewhere in there. Anyway, but the ice cream. The ice cream that I liked that Court gave out was Rocky Road.
Oh.
And it had streaks in it of chocolate, vanilla based. And I met my first black person when I was kind of hanging around the corner, and Mom didn't know it. And he was looking for the train station, St. Jane LC. Otherwise known as the St. Jane Long Common.
That's what my father called it.
Yeah, and so anyway, I overheard him. I said, I know where it is. And so I got in his pickup truck, and he went and got the stuff and then came back and gave me a nickel. Well, I trotted right over here, and I got some Rocky Road ice cream from Mr. Loves. Yeah, it was very good.
Oh, those are fun.
I just love that house. I felt so bad when I saw that dumb-looking high board fence around it, unadorned in every way. It brought the classy look of the house down the street.
Yeah.
But thank God that's gone, and the place is just beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just lovely.
One of the first buildings in the center. In other words, it was a centerpiece.
Well, I would think so.
Yeah, and it was a stagecoach stop, as Evangeline said, because the railroad had not been established until the 1870s.
Well, I remember about the train depot on the early part of the Gore Road there, because Gertrude Stewart from Highgate Falls years ago used to pick up the mail from the depot with her wagon and her horse and bring it back over the river to, Pelkey's store,
Sure.
Pelkey's store. And she did that for a long time. She used to churn butter while she was doing that, because she had a great big glass jar, and she'd have heavy cream in that, and she'd flop that back and forth as she rode along. Her horse didn't need much direction. And she would make butter while she's sitting in her seat doing from the train depot.
Thank you for those wonderful memories. That's
yeah.
fantastic.
Wonderful.
Does someone else have something to add as a memory or a comment? No? Okay. Great. Ray, did you want to pick up on...
Yeah, I thought that we kind of, Hank actually came up with the title for a handout. Well, actually, a booklet that I gave Charlie and I this morning called The Steiner Our House and Environs. And one of my favorite scenes in Highgate is the Civil War Monument. It also has the Spanish-American names of the Spanish Americans. For me, it's kind of interesting. The soldier standing there is facing north rather than south. They all went south. Well, except for the St. Albans raid, where there were a few who went north, right? And it kind of is a symbol for me, that soldier standing there with 199 names of Civil War veterans looking at the Steinhauer House. That's the first thing they see. They saw this center being built, these young men. In Highgate history, as it was written in the 1800s, there was seldom a mention of the population of French Canadians who were here. On that monument of 199 names, 47 are French Canadian names. Half of those are relatives of mine and Hank, my sisters. My great-great-grandfather, Theodore's name is there. Theodore Lambert was 46 years old when he volunteered. About 6 months later, he had to resign his enlistment because of rheumatism. He was aching, and he wouldn't going to be able to hold a rifle, I guess. His three sons, Theodore Jr., whose name on the placard is Lombard, Newell, whose actual name was Noel, and Joseph, all enlisted together with at least 10 other relatives at that particular time. The three brothers went south. All of them were wounded. They all came back to Highgate. Joseph lived and died here. His tomb is in the old Catholic cemetery. Noel is, he lived in Springfield, Vermont. He died there, but his tombstone is in the old Catholic cemetery. And Theodore lived in Massachusetts, North Adams area, and his tombstone is in Southview Cemetery in Massachusetts, right near the city, but in the southern part of the city of North Adams. I go into this detail because the Civil War was a turning point in our history, and there were willing volunteers. Of the 199 names on there, I'm not quite actually sure of how many, but most of them were volunteers. They didn't have to be enlisted, and they didn't have to be, drafted. They wanted this country to be united. And so we still have the United States of America. And so they're looking at the Steinhauer House. And this community has a fixture, in my opinion, has a building that can unite the center of this town, historically, as well as aesthetically, as well as in its own purpose and function, whatever the function is. I'm speaking as a non-taxpayer of Highgate. What I'm saying, I just hope and pray that there is a vision of the history of this place. It's very, very special. And the centerpiece is that building, as far as I'm concerned, with another piece that is symbolic of what our people have done for this community and for this country. So with that, I think I'm preaching here, but
Thank you.
You're doing very well. You've got us spellbound.
Oh, thank you, Ray.
Wonderful words and very good encapsulation of the wonderful history of our town. It's great. Evangeline, do you have something to add to that or anything else?
I have a couple of other points of interest. And if I could add to what you just spoke of, over the years, this property, of course, was dear to me. I lived across the street for many years, and I still have it in sight from my home where I live now. And I was saddened to see the neglect it had suffered. My plea to the Highgate community is to save this building in the hands of someone who has the means and the focus it needs. It will not be demolished, and once again will become beautiful. Again, as I have said, in the right hands. It's not an overnight situation, but perhaps if we focus on it, it will happen. Other than that, I have a couple of notes on I don't know how much time do you want me
Yeah,
to do?
you're good. Another couple minutes. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to speak about the post office, which sits in a corner of the property. My dad, Amity Tremblay, was commissioned as postmaster in October of 1938, and in the summer of 38, the post office was relocated from the Lion store, which is on the corner, which at one time was DeZorcy's, then NATO's, Bushy, DeZorcy, Bushy, NATO's, and La Roche. But that's where the post office once was, in the Lion store. And then it was relocated to the Trombley store, and it was in a corner of the store, a 9 by 12 enclosure in the front corner of the building. And if you've noticed the post office sign up above, that once hung there, and that was hand stenciled and painted by my dad. In October of 1960, Marie and Amity purchased the land at the corner of the property from the Asseltine estate, and a building was erected by local contractor Charles Moore of Highgate Center. It was then leased by the Post Office Service, Postal Department, and in 1961, it began operation at its present location on Canada Street. My dad served as postmaster at this location until he retired in 1965 after 27 years of service. And touching upon the rural carrier portion, I remember, to the best of my memory, it was Willard Cassidy, and then Mr. Ernest Bouchard. In fact, Mr. Cassidy's mail sleigh is at the museum. If you have a chance to visit the museum, you would see it there.
Any memories, comments about the post office, the monument, the Civil War? Yes, back here.
The guy by the name of Bird Lombard also was
He did.
delivered.
He did.
Yeah.
That was going on in more in depth with the rural carriers. I just highlighted it a bit.
Yeah, that's right.
And the girl that delivered today, Teresa, her grandmother was a Laura. Harvey Cole's wife.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Susan.
I can talk about that because I work here. I remember Louis Snappart. I was looking for a job. I was about 12 years old, and I went over to see Mrs. Connell, and I went over and I bought a pair of potatoes for 50 cents an hour. That was my summer job. Once I got trained and once I got older, she was the one that was in the back and I was in the back. She was excellent to work with. I worked for 6 years, a lot of good memories there. I remember the French fries were 21 cents.
To die for.
They were the best French fries.
Ever.
We got a lot of potatoes. And the soda was, I think, 12 cents and hot dogs were 25 cents. One thing I wanted to say, I can still remember this one order, and he's gone now, but I'm going to say it, Gerard Trombley. Our faculty come in every night, order a Pepsi, a small French fry. You remember that, don't you, John? 2 hot dogs with mustard and relish. Dennis Cassidy was another one that would order pretty much the same thing. As soon as I drove them in, the baskets went down. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, one,
Quiet, John.
yeah, one recollection I have was getting a 25-cent haircut from
Oh,
Rudy.
yes.
Yeah.
Did we not have a Mr. Alex Furley who was postmaster at the time?
Alex Furlan
Yes.
as the postmaster?
After, I took this only to the time of my dad's retirement. And yes, Mr. Alex Furlan
Yes, he was lovely.
was postmaster at this
Yeah.
He built
post
a
office.
home at the top of, not
Carter Hill.
Carter
Yes.
Hill.
Carter Hill.
You
Yes,
had the farm that was around the corner.
Oh, it had, yes, that's right, it had that.
Alex Furlan.
Windows.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
he was substitute. At the time, my dad was postmaster, and then he was commissioned
I
postmaster.
remember.
Okay, anyone else?
The farm that I had ran for 45 years was a bouchard, which went to a train, which went to Sanderson. Now, the Sandersons were in the late 1800s. There's 3 or 4 of them buried in North Shore Cemetery, and they were Civil War veterans.
Yep, yep.
When J.B. Sanderson operated the train car, well, before the train, there was a creamery there. And he also was partners with a creamery right here in the center of town. We have a log that I presented to the Historical Society. They put out 48 tons of butter in 1930. That's when the trains owned it.
Yeah.
And then the Sanderson, that was owner of the brick house at the time, was a selectman here. If you look at the Highgate Falls Bridge, one of the select board members is J.B. Sanderson.
Interesting,
Yeah.
interesting. You have anything to add, Ray?
Well, I don't know. My memories, of course, of this area go back to World War II. And Court Laux was running the filling station and repair station. And during World War II, somehow or other, he stored up some firecrackers and fired, things. And so it was VE Day, May 8, 1945. And people came and converged on the center, cars all over the place. So anybody who wanted to buy firecrackers could go to Courts and buy them, and they set them off over there on the village green. Now, my dad wasn't about to buy firecrackers. He had a fire engine siren. And so he somehow or other nailed that thing to a tree stump in front of the house where we used to live. We called it the house on the corner. And right where Mill Hill starts. And everybody had a crank at it. And I did too. And finally, Dad let me get in there, and I started cranking, and all of a sudden I look over, I'm cranking, but I look over to the right, and there are these young women coming up the hill from New York City, vacationing at the Manor Mayfair. Well, by God, didn't that crank go faster? I thought they were admiring me, but I don't really know. That wasn't the end of the story, though. Henry Boudreau had come back, having been almost mortally wounded at Anzio Beach in Italy, and he had terrible wounds, but he recovered, and he was wearing his army suit, uniform. And he comes along, and he gives the siren a crank, and Georgette Frazier is there. She's got an eye on Henry. And so Dad says, let's take this thing for a ride. So somehow or other, he spikes it on the back of this kind of pickup box that he had put in the back of his old Pontiac car. And Henry gets in the middle, standing up, waving to the crowds as the Dad's driving. And there's somebody sitting there, down there cranking the darn thing. And Georgette's in the back seat with my sister Catherine, and I'm with Dad. And so we go all the way to East Highgate and come all the way back. And it was one of my fondest memories of Henry Boudreau, who many of you knew, in terms of his just spirit that he had, that he came back and he was the veteran that was representing all the forces that were, out there fighting and doing, and had become victorious in Europe. So that was the connection with with Court Laux, but it was kind of like that thing. I remember those firecrackers going off. Well, Court had an old sedan, and I can't remember what make it was, but it was kind of a tannish looking thing, and he'd drive it into the garage that was, I can't remember if it was this garage or whatever, but the gas station was here and the garage was up there between the station and the Steinhauer house. And somehow the people got wind of the fact that Court was going to back the car out because it was kind of a show.
Oh.
Because Court would start the engine up, he'd rev it up like crazy, you know, rum, 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 and then he'd jam the gear in reverse, and it would grind away like crazy. And I remember distinctly hearing people say, "Grind me another pound, Court." And so it was.
Bernard Train remembers that car. Also.
Is that right? You remember that car, Bernard?
Fort Clouds used to have a clutch put in every year.
So I guess my memory isn't faulty.
No,
there,
if your memory's faulty, it's too good.
Well, that's a good memory.
Any other comments? Memories? Yes.
I just want to comment that I travel. I don't have long memories of Highgate, but I travel the state, and every town, or a lot of the towns I go through, has a central something. And I think that has the potential to really sort of put Highgate on the map when you drive through and say, oh, that gem.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something, from all the memories you have going into the future, that's what should be thought.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing that.
Good point, yes. Yeah, Ruth?
Yes, when I was in high school, I babysat in the Loud's house. Someone was renting it. I don't remember the name of the family or anything. But I look back and I think of the architecture of that house. And it would be so, I don't know, so tragic to see it demolished. If someone could just, bring it back to life.
I'll back up my sister's comment with the fact that I'm a resident of Florida now. They have no sense of history down there. A house or a building built for 30 years, business complexes, 30 years, they're gone. Here and there, they spot these things, but the sense of history just isn't there. And this is something that, this community, it has a history. And anyway, there could be a centerpiece. Enough.
One final.
This is my. I'm sorry, Hank. I don't.
No, you're good.
Dominating
You're good.
this.
No, the time is good.
My sister Barbara. Was on the library board. And she and I had a conversation about the Steinhauer house. It was going to become the town library. And so after she died, I sent a check. And I said, this is not about me. This is about Highgate. It's about our parents. And I just hope it's going to be put to good use. And I made the suggestion in a letter that a plaque could be put up somewhere in the house, on the house, in memory of. And I just hope my parents' names are going to appear on it.
Well, there's some things that people have to realize too, is that it's not just our decision. Unfortunately, the state oversees things to death. It took us 1.5 years to get the clearance and pass the test, even to take down that old building. So what do they point at when they look at this one? Lead paint, asbestos. So you have to look at that, not that. Yeah, I agree with the idea of renovation and try to save, but what will the state allow us to do? That's what we're going to. The next phase now is septic and water. They're going to, I believe Heidi can address it. They're going to do some planning here to see what's capable. for the new regulations today, you can't go by using the old septic. You just have to have it all redone, so that's our next step as of now. This building here in the back that was built only 25, 30 years ago, they're going to allow us to be able to take that apart and go put it down as a salt shed. That isn't of any historic value.
No.
But these days allowed us to move that one also.
Yeah.
We're in a semi-democratic situation as far as that. We can't do what we want. Because if it was the people of the town of Highgate, we could renovate it. The carpenters would come out of the wall, we'd just do it. But you can't anymore.
Need a special team with this asbestos.
Yes, you need testing.
Yeah.
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 It was like back in the old days, carpenters would come out of the woodwork and put that sucker up.
Any other comments or?
And it's up to the townspeople what they want done.
Yeah.
The townspeople vote to restore it, and that's what we have to go with the vote of the people.
Once the state has its permit, our permit's all in place and everything.
Yeah. By the way, just to mention, I've got a handout of some of the things that I talked about, so if anybody wants one, just feel free to get one, pick one up.
Any other comments? We don't have to go to 2 o'clock.
No.
We can, yes, back here.
We talked about a lot of things that have taken place in town. We said the Methodist Church, Russian Church, or Catholic churches, all together here, where they were located. Does anybody know?
Well, I do, having been a clergyman myself.
Excuse me, Ray, would you mind repeating what Clarence said
Yeah.
to the microphone?
Yeah,
I think we're going to have a much better video of this conversation if people are holding microphones,
Yeah.
especially when cars go by.
Yeah. Clarence, you said something about the Catholic churches and the history of it. The intent of when we met as a committee, and I was at the tail end of the last part of it in terms of the planning, was to focus on this area, the Steinhauer House and its environs. In other words, not 100 yards beyond it, but that was the only, because if we started going down the road of all the history of Highgate, we could be here, well, probably you wouldn't be, but we could be here for hours. I mean, it's just filled with all kinds of things. It was a focus. And next year, if there's another gathering.
Highgate and beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Heidi, how about that?